I spotted my daughter sitting on a bench outside Riverside Commons with 2 suitcases and my granddaughter asleep against her shoulder, and my heart dropped straight to the pavement. It was a Tuesday morning. I had stopped for coffee at the little cafe on Elm before heading to the office, something I did maybe twice a month when I needed to think. I almost didn't look up from my phone when I passed the park entrance. Almost. She didn't see me at first. She was staring at the ground, one hand resting on top of the suitcase, the other wrapped around my granddaughter's small back. She had that look on her face, the one I recognized from when she was 9 years old and had failed a spelling test she'd studied hard for. Not crying. Past crying. Just empty. I walked over slowly so I wouldn't startle her. "Sylvia!" She looked up and her chin trembled for exactly 1 second before she pressed her lips together and steadied herself. She was so much like me it sometimes made my chest ache. "Mom." Her voice came out smaller than she probably intended. "Get in the car," I said. She blinked. "Mom, We'll talk in the car. Come on." I picked up the larger suitcase myself and started walking toward the parking garage. I heard her shift behind me, gently rousing my granddaughter, whispering, "Come on, sweetheart, Grandma's here." And those 3 words, "Grandma's here?" I felt them in my sternum. My granddaughter, Wren, was 5. She had my daughter's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, and she pressed her face into Sylvia's neck the entire walk to the car without ever fully waking up. I got them settled. I put the suitcases in the trunk. I sat down in the driver's seat, started the engine, and did not say anything for almost 2 full minutes. Then I said, "Tell me." Sylvia exhaled. "He fired me." I kept my eyes on the road. "Your father-in-law?" "Yes." "From the position at Crestline?" "Yes." "He called me into his office yesterday afternoon, said the company needed to restructure, said my role was being eliminated." She paused. "And then he said that honestly, he'd never thought I was the right fit. That I came from a different kind of background, that people like me tended to have certain limitations." I let that sit in the air for a moment. He used those words, "people like me." He did. "And the house?" She was quiet. I glanced over. She was looking out the passenger window. "He owns the property," she said finally. "The house is on land that's in his name." I didn't know that until about 4 months into the marriage. Donovan said it was just how the family structured things, that it was normal. She gave a short, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It wasn't normal. "So when he fired you, he also told me to vacate. He gave me until Friday, but I couldn't stay there, not after what he said, not with Wren in that house." She turned back to face forward. Donovan wasn't home. He didn't answer my calls. I packed what I could. "We left this morning." I nodded slowly. "Why didn't you call me, Sylvia?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I knew what you would do." "And what is that?" She looked at me. "Fix it. I want to tell you about Donovan's father. His name was Conrad, and he was the kind of man who wore his money like armor and his opinions like weapons. He had built Crestline Logistics from a regional freight company into something with 12 distribution centers and contracts with 3 Fortune 500 suppliers. He was proud of this in the way that some men are proud of things, completely, loudly, and at the expense of everyone around them. When Sylvia married Donovan 6 years ago, I attended the wedding and I smiled at all the right moments, and I watched Conrad give his toast, and I thought, this man will cause my daughter grief. I didn't say it, she was happy. Donovan was kind to her then, genuinely kind, and I told myself that the father was not the son. I was right about that, actually. Donovan wasn't cruel, he was weak, which is a different problem entirely, and in some ways harder. What I had not told Sylvia, what I had told very few people, was that I knew Crestline Logistics, not as an in-law, as a creditor. 18 months before that Tuesday morning in the parking garage, a private equity firm I had quietly partnered with had acquired a significant debt position in Crestline during a refinancing round. Conrad had needed capital to expand the Memphis and Denver facilities. He'd taken on leverage he thought was manageable. The firm I worked with, Harrington Capital, a name Conrad would have recognized if he'd looked closely at the paperwork, which he hadn't, now held notes on approximately 40% of Crestline's operating debt. Conrad had fired my daughter. He had told her she had limitations. He had put her and my 5-year-old granddaughter on the street with 2 suitcases. And he had done all of this without ever asking who his lender's partners were. I had not always been in this position. I want to be honest about that, because this is not a story about a woman who was born into power. I grew up in a small house outside of Dayton with a father who worked the line at a manufacturing plant, and a mother who did alterations out of our kitchen. We were not poor, but we were close enough to it that I understood what it felt like to need something you couldn't afford. I put myself through 2 years of community college. I transferred. I worked nights at a hotel front desk while I finished my degree. I took the first job I was offered after graduation, accounts receivable at a mid-sized freight brokerage in Columbus. And I stayed late every night for 3 years learning every part of that business that I could. I won't bore you with the 30 years in between. The point is that when Conrad looked at my daughter and saw someone with limitations, what he was actually seeing was the absence of a certain kind of performance. The performance of old money, of legacy, of names that show up on buildings. He mistook quietness for smallness. It's a very common mistake. By the time Sylvia sat down in my passenger seat, I was the managing partner of a logistics consulting firm with clients across 11 states, a silent stakeholder in 3 mid-market freight companies, and, through Harrington, a creditor of Conrad's. I had never mentioned any of this to Conrad because Conrad had never asked. He had met me at the wedding rehearsal dinner, determined I was unimpressive, and subsequently directed most of his conversation elsewhere. I had let him. The first thing I did when I got home was make coffee. Bryn woke up fully when we pulled into my driveway, and she spent the first hour investigating every room in my house with the seriousness of a building inspector. I watched her from the kitchen doorway while the coffee brewed, this small, serious person opening cabinet doors and pressing the keys of my old piano with one finger, testing things. Sylvia sat at the kitchen table, and I put a mug in front of her, and I sat down across from her and said, "Tell me everything." Not the summary. Everything. She talked for almost 2 hours. The story that came out was worse than the version she'd given me in the car, not because Conrad had done anything dramatically different, but because of the accumulation of it. The 4 years of small comments at family dinners, the way he referred to her department at Crestline as Sylvia's project, even when she was running a team of 11 people. The way he'd once introduced her at a company event as Donovan's wife, without mentioning her name. The way Donovan had watched all of it and said after each incident, "That's just how he is. He doesn't mean anything by it." And then there was the thing she told me about the finances. Sylvia had been managing a vendor account reconciliation at Crestline. Not her primary role, but something Conrad had asked her to take on 8 months ago. To help out, he'd said. In the process of that work, she had noticed discrepancies. Not small ones. A logistics vendor called Summit Freight Solutions that appeared on invoices repeatedly, but that she couldn't find any corresponding shipment records for. Payments going out, no services coming in. Over the 14 months of records she'd reviewed, the total was somewhere north of $380,000. She had flagged it to Conrad. He had told her she was misreading the accounting structure. She had flagged it again, in writing, 2 weeks later. He had fired her 3 weeks after that. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table, and I thought about a man who had told her she had limitations. I thought about the $380,000. I thought about Ren pressing piano keys in my living room. "Do you still have the records?" I asked. Sylvia reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. I opened it. I read it carefully. Then I picked up my phone. There are things I have learned in 30 years of business that I did not learn in school. One of them is this. The most powerful move you can make is the one your opponent doesn't see coming because they don't believe you're capable of making it. The call I made that afternoon was to a woman named Sandra, who was our outside counsel at Harrington, and who had spent 20 years in corporate litigation before joining the firm. I told her what Sylvia had told me. I sent her the folder. I asked her how long it would take to get a forensic accountant in to review Crestline's books. "Given our debt position, we have audit rights under the credit agreement," Sandra said. "I can have someone there by Thursday." "I'd like it to be quiet," I said. "Of course." The second call I made was to my contact at Harrington directly. His name was Douglas, and he was not a man who wasted words. I explained the situation. I told him what Sylvia had found. I told him that based on what I was seeing, I believed there was a strong possibility of material misappropriation of company funds, and that as a creditor holding 40% of Crestline's operating debt, Harrington had both the right and the fiduciary obligation to investigate. Douglas was quiet for a moment. "Is this personal?" he asked. "It's both," I said. He appreciated the honesty. "I'll loop in the board." I did not contact Conrad. I did not contact Donovan, though Sylvia eventually did. A brief, civil phone call in which she told him she and Ren were safe and that she needed some time. Donovan sounded confused and then frightened, and then, toward the end of the call, like a man beginning to understand that something large had shifted beneath him. I sat in the hallway outside Sylvia's room and did not eavesdrop, but I heard the tone of it. The forensic accountant arrived at Crestline on Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, he had identified what he described to Sandra as Significant irregularities. Summit Freight Solutions, the phantom vendor, was a shell company. It had been incorporated 3 years earlier. The registered agent was a man named Victor, a name that meant nothing to me until Sanders sent me the incorporation documents, and I saw the secondary contact listed. It was Conrad's personal attorney. The shell company had been funneling money out of Crestline for at least 2.5 years. The $380,000 Sylvia had found was the visible portion. The total, once the forensic team had gone back further, was closer to $1.1 million. I sat with that number for a long time. My daughter had found this. She had flagged it twice in writing, and Conrad had fired her for it. I want to tell you about the moment Conrad found out who I was. It was not dramatic in the way these moments sometimes are in stories. There was no confrontation in a boardroom. There was no speech. What happened was that Sandra sent a formal notice to Crestline's registered legal address, copied to Conrad personally, informing him that Harrington Capital was invoking its audit rights under the credit agreement, and that, given the preliminary findings, the firm was also formally notifying him of its intent to accelerate the debt based on covenant violations related to financial misconduct. In plain language, Harrington was calling in a significant portion of what Crestline owed, immediately, based on the fraud. Crestline did not have the liquidity to cover it. Conrad's attorney called Sandra within 3 hours. Sandra called me after. "He wants to know who initiated this," she said. "What did you tell him?" I told him the firm acted on information received in the course of its creditor oversight responsibilities. Good. He then asked if this had anything to do with his daughter-in-law. I paused. "What did you say?" I said that was not a question I was in a position to answer. I smiled. Perfect. Conrad figured it out eventually. I think Donovan told him, once Donovan had started to understand the shape of things. I was told, secondhand, that when Conrad heard my name connected to Harrington, he went very quiet for a long time. I hoped it was instructive. I hope he spent some time with the memory of his own assumptions. The legal process took longer than a story usually allows. I won't compress it into something tidier than it was. There were months of proceedings. Conrad's attorney attempted several maneuvering strategies, none of which succeeded particularly well once the forensic documentation was complete. Conrad eventually agreed to a settlement that included repayment, penalties, and his resignation from the company's board. The state attorney's office opened a separate investigation. Donovan, throughout all of this, was not the villain. I think that matters to say. He had not known about the shell company. He had known about his father's treatment of Sylvia, and had not done enough to stop it. And that was its own kind of failure. The failure of the man who watches and says nothing, who chooses comfort over principle. Sylvia and Donovan spent a long time in that difficult middle space that marriages sometimes enter, where the question isn't whether you love each other but whether that's sufficient. I did not involve myself in that. It was not mine to fix. What was mine was Wren, who stayed with me for 11 weeks and who learned where I kept the good cookies and who asked me one evening, while I was sitting at my desk going through documents, "Grandma, do you have a job?" "I do," I said. "What kind of job?" I thought about it. I help companies when they're in trouble. She considered this. Like a doctor? A little like that. She seemed satisfied. She went back to her drawing. I looked at her for a moment, this small person with her serious eyes, and I thought about what it had cost my daughter to sit on that bench outside Riverside Commons and wait, not knowing what came next. I thought about what it costs any woman to be told, in whatever language the telling takes, that she comes from the wrong background, that she carries the wrong name, that her presence in certain rooms is conditional. Wren looked up. "Grandma, when are we going home?" I put my pen down. "Soon, sweetheart," I said. "Your mom is working some things out, but you're safe here. You know that, right?" She nodded like this was obvious and went back to her drawing. Sylvia went back to work before the legal proceedings were resolved. Not at Crestline. She didn't want that, and I understood. She took a role at a smaller company, a regional distribution firm run by a woman she respected, and within 8 months she had restructured their carrier contracts and saved them somewhere near $200,000 in annual costs. Her director called me once, unprompted, to tell me that Sylvia was the sharpest operational mind she'd hired in a decade. I did not say I know, but I thought it. I want to be honest about what I felt when I watched the proceedings against Conrad move forward. I did not feel triumphant, exactly. Triumph is too light a word for something that began in a park at 8 in the morning with my daughter's empty eyes and 2 suitcases. What I felt was something closer to relief, the specific relief of a debt being acknowledged, not a financial debt, the other kind, the kind where someone looks at another person and decides, without evidence, that she is lesser, that she can be discarded, that she will not know how to respond. I have made my whole life out of responding. There's something I tell the younger women I mentor when they come to me with stories of being overlooked, underpaid, dismissed. I tell them that the most dangerous thing you can be to the right person is invisible. Not invisible in the sense of being ignored. That's just pain, and it's real, and it isn't useful to romanticize it. But invisible in the sense of being underestimated. Of moving through spaces where people have already decided what you are and stopped looking. Conrad spent 6 years deciding what I was. He looked at me at a rehearsal dinner and he made his calculation and he never revisited it. He spent 6 years not asking questions about his lender's partners, not asking who his daughter-in-law's family was or what they had built or what they understood about the industry he thought was his alone. He fired my daughter on a Wednesday. By Thursday, I had made 2 phone calls. I am not telling you this to make myself the hero of my daughter's story. That is her story to tell, and she tells it better than I could. I am telling you because I want you to understand something about what silence looks like from the outside versus what it holds on the inside. I have been quiet in rooms my entire life, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was paying attention. And attention, over time, becomes something. It becomes understanding, and leverage, and the specific calm you feel when someone finally pushes far enough that all of what you've learned becomes useful. Conrad called it limitations. I call it patience. Ren is in 2nd grade now. She plays the piano. Actually plays it, not just pressing single keys anymore, but simple songs she picks up by ear. She is funny and stubborn, and she asks questions about everything, with a persistence that exhausts her teachers and delights me. Sylvia is doing well. Better than well, some days. There are still hard days. There are days when she calls me and I can hear the residue of all of it still sitting somewhere in her chest. I don't rush her through those calls. I let her talk. Conrad is no longer at Crestline. The company restructured under new leadership. I am told he has largely withdrawn from the business community he once moved to so confidently. I do not think about him very much. What I think about, more than anything, is that Tuesday morning, the way Sylvia looked up from that bench, the 1 second her chin trembled before she steadied herself. She steadied herself. That was all her? She had already done the hard part before I ever got there. She had gotten her daughter out of that house. She had protected what mattered. She had held herself together on a bench in a public park, waiting for a morning that would get better. She didn't know how. She just held on. I picked up the suitcase. That's all I did. The rest she built herself. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, on a bench, or in a parking lot, or at a kitchen table at midnight trying to understand how you got here, I want you to know that what comes next does not require you to be powerful or connected or to have spent 30 years building something. It requires you to make the next right decision. Just the next one. And then the one after that. You are not finished. Not even close. And the people who told you otherwise, they don't know who they're dealing with. Neither do you yet. But you will. I've thought a lot about what Conrad actually believed that Wednesday morning when he told my daughter to clear out her desk. I think he believed it was over. I think he looked at Sylvia and saw someone without the right last name, without the right family history, without whatever invisible credential he decided mattered. And he thought that made her removable. Disposable. I think he went home that evening and felt nothing in particular, because in his mind, she had never been significant enough to feel anything about. That's the thing about contempt. It blinds you to evidence. Conrad had worked alongside Sylvia for 4 years. He had watched her manage a team of 11 people, restructure carrier contracts, and identify over $1 million in fraudulent activity inside his own company. He saw all of that and still decided she was beneath him, not because the evidence wasn't there, but because he had made up his mind before he ever looked. There's a word for that. It's not bad luck. It's not fate. It's just the ordinary consequence of choosing arrogance over attention. When you stop paying attention to what's actually in front of you, you start making decisions based on the picture in your head instead of reality, and reality eventually corrects you. Sylvia did not set out to bring Conrad down. She flagged the discrepancies because she was doing her job honestly. She put it in writing because she believed in getting things right. She got fired for it, and then she packed her daughter's things and sat on a bench in a public park and held herself together until I drove by. That's not weakness. That's a woman doing the next right thing when every option in front of her looks wrong. That's what integrity actually looks like in practice, not in speeches. And Ren, my granddaughter, pressing piano keys in my living room, asking me if I had a job, accepting the word safe as a complete answer. She is watching all of this. Children always are. They are watching what the adults in their lives do when things go badly. They are building their understanding of what's possible, what's survivable, what a person looks like when she doesn't fall apart. Ren watched her mother protect her first. Then she watched her grandmother make 2 phone calls. Then she watched her mother rebuild. I hope she carries that. I hope when her own hard days come, And they will, because everyone's due. She remembers that the women in her family do not stay on the bench. What I want to say, at the end of all of it, is this. The choices Conrad made over 30 years, to dismiss, to underestimate, to take what wasn't his, to silence the person who caught him. Those choices didn't stay isolated, they accumulated. And when they finally reached their weight limit, there was no dramatic reversal. No opportunity to rewind. Just consequence, quiet and complete. We don't get to decide how we're remembered by the people we underestimate. That's the part Conrad never understood. He thought he was erasing Sylvia from his story. He didn't realize she was writing his.